I speak in favor of 371 because it is one of the tools that the founders gave us to maintain control over a central government that is supposed to have enumerated powers. This is one of the vehicles that we can use to ensure that they implement fiscal responsibility, just as we have here in Georgia. I speak in favor of the bill along with many others across the state. We appreciate a positive vote on your behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
In 1994, Ronald Reagan wrote a letter encouraging the states to continue the fight to propose a balanced budget amendment via a state convention. Ronald Reagan, when he came into office, got behind the movement both to propose a balanced budget amendment through Congress and through the states, and fully supported both. This is what he said. In that letter, Reagan wrote, "We can't depend on Congress to discipline itself. We must rely on the states to force Congress to act on our balanced budget amendment. Fortunately, our nation's founders gave us the means to amend the Constitution through action of state legislatures. That is the only strategy that will work." Reagan watched the Senate propose the balanced budget amendment in 1982 and then watch it die in the House. For 40 years, a balanced budget amendment has been at the forefront of national discussion. 75% of the American people support it. In 40 years, Congress has never, ever proposed it, and so it is left to the states. Ronald Reagan trusted the states, Abraham Lincoln trusted the states, and we, the American people, trust you. And so I would ask that you support SR 371.
I think we can all agree that we have an out-of-control federal government. Just take a look at our deficit. Also, there is something that Alexander Hamilton said. He said it must be utterly repugnant to this Constitution to subvert the state governments or oppress the people. And what he was saying there is that the states have the right to rein in the federal government because they formed the federal government in the first place. And we trust our state representatives. You're closer to us than any of the people in Washington, D.C. to know what the citizens want from each and every one of you.
I live on a budget, and I can bet probably $100 you all live on a budget. I bet you the people here live within a budget. Why can't our federal government get it? It bothers me the fact that when we go bankrupt, and we will go bankrupt in 5 to 7 years with this kind of spending, $6.8 million a minute. Who's going to suffer? The elderly and the poor are going to suffer. People don't realize when those entitlement checks, Social Security, disability, military retirees, federal retirees, welfare recipients, when they don't come in, that's 100 million people on the streets looking for food and shelter. The way I look at it is this way. We're all on a bus together. We're cruising down the road and Congress is driving this bus. State legislators, you're riding shotgun. We come up to a sign and it says, bridge out ahead. What does Congress do? They step on the accelerator faster, from 60 to 70 miles an hour. We say, Congress, you see that? Oh, don't worry, we got it under control. Another sign comes up, says, bridge out ahead. We can see clearly the bridge is out ahead now. I ask you, state legislators, I asked you, I beg you, to hit the mercy brake and take over the steering. You have the power. You've always had the power through the 10th Amendment and through the Article 5 process. Please do it for your children, your grandchildren, and our country. Thank you.
How did we get this national debt of over $17 million, plus trillions more in unfunded liabilities? Congress spent on objects of which it has no constitutional authority, such as teaching Chinese prostitutes how to drink responsibly, bailout of private businesses, welfare handouts, farming programs, education schemes, grants paid to states to bribe them into implementing unconstitutional federal programs. It was the unconstitutional spending which gave us this crushing debt. What should we do about the unconstitutional spending? We must eliminate pork. We must systematically dismantle unconstitutional federal departments and agencies, except that the Department of Education should be shut down and its bureaucrats sent home by 5 o'clock Friday. All these functions must be restored to the states and the people.
A balanced budget amendment doesn't address the unconstitutional spending that caused the massive debt in the first place. Passing more amendments will also be ignored, and worse, used to legitimize or legalize the status quo. What makes us think that Congress will abide by these new amendments?
Did you know that Georgia receives 38.6% of its state budget from the federal government of Georgia, federal government? If Georgia really wants the federal government to balance the federal budget, then Georgia should send back all federal money coming to Georgia. Are the representatives in Georgia willing to refuse the federal money and any mandates attached? Unless they are, an application for the Constitutional Convention for a balanced federal budget is a sham.
If we cannot trust the President and our Congress to follow our current Constitution and its amendments and the budget process that was put in place by our longstanding Constitution, how are we going to believe that they're going to abide by any other Constitution that might come along?
This budget issue is a little bit like a woman's grocery cart in a Walmart shopping center. You can jam all kinds of things in there that aren't milk, butter, and eggs. And that's what we can do with a budget. We know all too well what happens in our local counties when they start writing bonds. And so balancing budgets is really not what I think most Americans think it's like keeping for governments. It's not keeping a checkbook up to date. We have many, many creative ways in government of spending money. So the idea of a balanced budget working, I think, is very iffy.
Overtaxation, overborrowing is threatening, the future of not only my family, but every family in this nation. And I feel that our present administration of government is hostile to the Constitution, and that their attitude is unlike that of the founders. Their worldview is hostile to a constitutional form of government and to a Republican form of government.
The constitutional amendment on a balanced budget was introduced during the Reagan administration. In 1982, we crossed over $1 trillion in debt. No constitutional amendment. In 1986, we crossed over to $2 trillion in debt. No constitutional amendment. 1992 rather, crossed over $4 trillion. No constitutional amendment. 2006, $8 trillion. And today we have a national debt of well over $17 trillion, and yet no meaningful attempt by Congress to rein in out of control spending and to pass a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the amendments to the Constitution passed by Congress over the last 200+ years, they've never restrained their own authority or their own abilities. And the fact that, and for that reason, we have no choice but to have the states act today. We have waited patiently for Congress to act, and I've heard my friends ask that we wait for more. We've waited long enough. To do nothing is tantamount to surrender of our nation's long-term economic health and social well-being, and to subject our children and grandchildren to the debtor's prison caused by the folly of this generation if we continue to do nothing. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move to do pass at the proper time.
All right, any further comments from any member on the committee? If there are none, don't applaud it, please. If there are none, the chair will now entertain motions on Senate Resolution 371. Is there first the motion do pass? Mr. Lindsay's motion, seconded by Mr. Welch. All right, any discussion on the motion? No discussion. Are there any amendments? There are no amendments. The chair will call the main question. All in favor of do pass Senate Resolution 371 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign.
No.
The chair rules the motion carried.